Okay, well, thank you all for making it out. My name is Akil Kostabai. I'm the co-president of the Undergraduate Political Science Association, and we're really grateful to have FairVote come out today to talk to us about ranked choice voting and just about elections in general. So yeah, thank you all. And I'm excited to see how this event goes. And also, the Undergraduate Political Science Association hosts a lot of opportunities for political science students to get engaged with professors, with outside organizations, and also with each other through like trivia nights, election night watch parties, and other fun events. So yeah, just a quick plug for the organization. But yeah, thanks for making that out.
Okay. Well, I want to do a survey. Hi, everyone. I'm Pat. I'm Pat Zabawa. I'm a director at Rank My Vote, which is an organization that is seeking to implement ranked choice voting here in Michigan. So we work with FairVote, which FairVote is a national umbrella group, but I live here in Ann Arbor, and I've worked on campaigns here the past couple of years to bring ranked choice voting to cities, which we'll go over. But yeah, that's who I am. Alrighty. The computer went to sleep, so it came back up. Yeah, we'll be talking about enhancing democracy through election and redistricting reform. Oh, I didn't click it yet. No, yep.
Okay,
Yep.
there we go. All right.
So what we'll be talking about today is why reform in the US, what is ranked choice voting, how ranked choice voting transforms elections, ranked choice voting in Michigan, past and current, and then proportional ranked choice voting and voting rights, proportional ranked choice voting, meaning multi-winner ranked choice voting. So it sounds very academic, but right now we vote in elections with multiple winners, such as city council elections, school board elections, regent elections, and proportional ranked choice voting is just applying ranked choice voting to those elections. Who doesn't like ranked choice voting and why, and the interplay with other reforms, and next steps taking action. Since there's so few of us, I want to ask if anyone is familiar with ranked choice voting. All right, cool. Then we won't have to belabor the point too much, but why reform in the US? So I think when I've talked to voters, I mentioned this earlier today, when I've talked to voters I think universally have the experience of limited voter choice. So not seeing their ballot and thinking these people are not the options that I want, not representative of my views. So therefore, they are dissatisfied with the process. Vote splitting is another issue with our current system. So right now, if everyone wants ice cream, there could be a lot of ice cream candidates, and they all split the vote, and the non-ice cream candidate could win. And again, non-representative of the electorate. Gerrymandering, so then the non-ice cream candidate would cut districts into size so that they always win, even though everyone else wants ice cream, leading to a lack of representation. So people then become very dissatisfied with the process, and their elected representatives don't represent them. There's also voting rights challenges in the US. Right now, more than ever, arguments back and forth, adjudications, groups that are fighting for voting rights and groups that are in power and taking away voting rights. I'll first dive into single winner ranked choice voting. So giving voters more choice and more voice for single winner offices like president, senator, governor, and mayor. If you're all familiar with it, then I won't dive in too much into it. But ranked choice voting offers voters the ability to, I like to say when I describe it to voters, gives them more power. So you could still vote for one candidate as you would now, but you also get the option of voting for a second choice or a third choice, fourth choice, and so on. This promotes majority winners so that in case someone gets the majority of first choice votes, they win if they have 50% of the vote plus one or more. If not, then the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and the voters who voted for that candidate's second vote is tallied until a candidate has majority support of the electorate. It's a simple change with powerful impacts for our democracy.
So thank you all for coming. So my name is Diane Silver, and I am the advocacy program manager at FairVote. So I advocate for ranked choice voting. I think it's great. So we're tag teaming here for this little presentation. So I want to share real quick. I know that you all are familiar with ranked choice voting, so we'll go fast just to review like what it is, how it works. So the big idea, of course, is that instead of just voting for one candidate, you get to rank order the candidates. And the big change is that now, in order to win, a candidate has to get a majority of votes. So majority is 50% plus one single vote. They have to get more than 50%. And so that's the key, because obviously often when there are more than two candidates, nobody gets a majority at first. And so that's the big change. So the way that ranked choice voting works, obviously, is if you have the vote split among several candidates and nobody gets that majority, then we move to what's called an instant runoff. And so the lowest vote getter gets eliminated. This 10% candidate, Darius, is going to get dropped out. And then it's as if everybody goes back to the polls and votes again, just like a regular runoff, right? Everybody gets to vote again, except you don't have to actually go back to the polls. The vote is already there. Everybody who chose A, B, or C, that would be Andy, Berta, or Carla, they're still in the race. So their vote their vote in the runoff will continue to go to their favorite candidate. It's only these Darius voters who their favorite is not in the race anymore, so they're going to have to choose somebody else. Well, their ballot shows who they want if they can't have Darius. It's their second choice on the ballot. And so that's exactly what happens in the tally. Darius is gone, and you can see how Darius's votes have now gotten distributed to those second choices on various ballots. So now Andy has 42%, but that's not more than 50, so we still don't have a majority winner. So we do it again. We're going to have another instant runoff. The lowest vote getter is going to get dropped out, and it's going to be as if everybody goes back to the polls and votes again, except they don't have to actually go. We already have those votes. And so then those votes get distributed to second or third choices, and now somebody has more than 50%. So that's the basic idea of how ranked choice voting works. How does ranked choice voting transform elections? In a whole bunch of ways. The first is that it promotes voter choice, because this whole idea of no longer having a spoiler, that if you have more than two candidates, you're going to split the vote, and that's going to spoil the vote and hand the win to the other side. Whichever side is the other side, they're going to win, right? And so candidates who might want to run, potential candidates, get told, don't run, you're going to be a spoiler, you're going to split the vote. And so they say, all right, I won't run. Well, with ranked choice voting, that doesn't happen. So good people who are inclined to serve can actually throw their hat in and run. And so it gives voters more choice, more candidates on the ballot. That's a good thing. No more vote splitting, which I just talked about, and no more strategic voting. So if there are more than two candidates, often you get the candidate gets told, don't run, you're going to be a spoiler, right? And voters get told, don't vote for fill in the blank. You know they don't have a chance to win, right? You're just wasting your vote. That people get told that all the time. If they're a fan of a third party, if they're a libertarian or if they're a Green Party, fan, they get told, don't waste your vote on that third party candidate. They're never going to win. And so voters are in this dilemma. Do I vote for the candidate I really like and help that party gain, a foothold, or do I vote for what's essentially my second choice because I don't want my last choice? So voters are forced to vote against somebody rather than for somebody. So that's not a good thing. Ranked choice voting eliminates that. Promotes majority winners. We already talked about that. And it improves campaign civility. This is a really great one, because if you think about it, we're in an election season right now. How much have you heard candidates actually talking about what they're going to do for our country, what their platform is, right? What you mostly hear is how dire and horrible it's going to be if the other side wins, right? So campaigning is all about how terrible my opponent is. The world is going to fall apart if they win. You got to get out and vote for me so that we don't get stuck with them. So with ranked choice voting, that kind of campaigning to your base, to your narrow base, isn't good enough because usually the base isn't 50% of the population. In fact, I'm going to say that close to 50% of the population now is not aligned with either of the major parties. We are up in the high 40% now of American voters who report that they are not registered with either of the major parties. So that's a huge number. So with campaigning to your narrow base won't work if you have to get a majority. And so instead of playing dirty, there's incentive to play positive. You want to go to voters who are going to vote for that green candidate or that libertarian candidate and say, well, if I'm not your first choice, I at least want to be your second choice. Here's what we have in common. Even though we have some things different, here's what we have in common. It turns the campaign back to issues rather than mudslinging, and it makes the campaign more positive. That's a good thing. It also improves representation for demographic groups that are historically underrepresented, namely women and people of color. So we'll go into that a little bit more later. And it creates this incentive for broader engagement with the voters, which I just talked about. I'm going to turn it back to Pat to come on up here and talk about where ranked choice voting is used and what's going on here at home.
Yeah, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, but ranked choice voting in the late 2010s was instituted in Maine and Alaska statewide for legislative and federal and statewide offices. But you can see on the map that there's a lot of places that do use it, so it's not as alien of a concept as its opponents make it out to be, in terms of it's used in military and overseas ballots in those states in the South and in a lot of municipal localities and primaries. So, and I'll just add real quick that the map is expanding real quickly as campaigns like Rank My Vote are working on it in states. About ranked choice voting in Michigan and its history, it was used in the 1970s in Ann Arbor when a student party actually gained 2 seats on city council. And one of the 2 major parties was afraid that this party would then become a spoiler in the mayoral election, and Ann Arbor instituted ranked choice voting for its municipal elections. After that student party, and it was used, but after that student party essentially graduated from college and lost power, the 2 major parties got back together and put in a low turnout election the removal of ranked choice voting from Ann Arbor's Ann Arbor City Charter. So that shows what can happen when we don't keep up with our electoral reforms and don't maintain them. In 2004, likewise, with third-party initiative, it was placed on Ferndale's City Charter as an amendment and passed. In 2019, in East Point, it was approved in a voting rights case brought on by the federal government, since East Point had not had any primarily minority black representation in its city council. And then Rank My Vote gets created in 2021 with Lisa Dish's sponsorship on the Ann Arbor City Council. It was placed before voters here and passed. And in 2023, Rank My Vote, we ran signature drives in Kalamazoo, East Lansing, and Royal Oak, and it passed in all 3 of those, which is awesome. No losses yet, and we're going to keep it that way. Up next is perhaps Traverse City, Lansing, Detroit, but we're really aiming for a statewide ballot initiative at 2026, which is a huge undertaking. So we are planning for it right now. We've been road mapping it, and you can see that signature collection will probably begin next year. All righty, I'll hand it back to Diane.
Okay, thanks. I'm excited about that. All right, we want to talk a little bit about how proportional ranked choice voting works. Are you all also familiar with proportional ranked choice voting already? Oh, only a little bit. Great, I get to teach you something. Cool. So the big idea is proportional representation. So what that means is if a particular group of voters might be a racial or ethnic group, might be a religious group, might be a partisan group, could be a geographic group, like everybody who lives in a particular part of town and has some particular issue. If a particular group of voters are like-minded and are going to intend to all vote for the same thing or the same bundle of policies, if they have a certain percentage in the population, they ought to have approximately that percentage in the representation. So just simplifying it to our two-party system, if Party A has 60% of the population and B has 40%, we'd like to see approximately a 60-40 split of those two parties in the government, whether it's a city council or the state legislature or Congress. Wouldn't that be a thing, right? So proportionality. And the idea is that by using ranked choice voting when you have a multi-winner election, it works when you have a legislative body. So what we just talked about was single winner ranked choice voting. So single winner offices like a mayor or a governor or a Senate seat, right? There's only going to be one winner. But when you're electing a city council or a state legislature, any legislative body, there's multiple seats. And so for the voter, multi-winner ranked choice voting is the exact same experience. There's a whole bunch of candidates on the ballot and you rank order them. And that's it. It's no more complicated for the voter. The tallying is different in that the threshold to win is now different from majority. That 50% threshold, what we define as majority, is the threshold when there's only one seat available. The threshold is 50%. But when there are more seats, then that threshold comes down because we're looking for that proportionality. So once it started being used in some cities, such as Minneapolis, as you see up here, in Cambridge, Portland, Oregon, Albany, California, Arlington, Virginia, it's been used in some cities, and the idea is that it promotes that proportional representation. The mechanics of how it does that, we could talk about in our Q&A if you want to know, like, under the hood, how does it work? But the big idea is this: if you have a diverse population like this, when you have just a single winner seat, you're going to get a majority winner, but they're going to be from the majority group, right? But if you have multiple seats available and you use this method, then you can get that proportionality and get representation from the major groups in the population. And the thing that's really interesting about it is this info at the bottom of how large does a group have to be able to get representation. It depends on how many seats are up for election at the same time. So if we were designing an election system from scratch, right, if we had just a blank slate and said, how would you design this? There's a question of, well, what do you think is an appropriate percentage of the population that deserves a seat at the table, that deserves a voice, right? So the more seats that are available, the lower the threshold becomes. We think the sweet spot is right around 15, 16%. If some group of voters is 15, 16% of the population, they deserve a seat at the table. And to make that happen, you would need to have 5 seats up for election all at once. That would take the threshold down from 50% all the way down to 16.6%. If you say, no, that's too low, like the idea is we don't want fringe candidates to be able to get in. You don't want crazy people to be able to run for office and the threshold is so low that they can get in, right? So it's this balance of where's the right line. If you have only 4 seats up at once, then the threshold is 20%. If you have only 3 seats up at once, then the threshold is 25%. With 2 seats up, it's 33%. With only 1 seat, it's that 50%. So the legislators, as we pass laws to create this system, there's some decision-making to be done of what should that threshold be. The interesting thing is that we've been using proportional RCV as a remedy for voting rights violations under the Voting Rights Act. There are municipalities where there's a Voting Rights Act, it's either federal or in some states they have one, where some significant group of the population is underrepresented. They're not getting that seat at the table. And so they sue under the Voting Rights Act. And it used to be that the remedy was always to take an at-large election where the majority group always dominates and to say, let's carve the city up into districts so that, there will be a neighborhood or a district that's going to be majority minority. That minority group of the whole population will be the majority in that district. And then they'll get, at least 1 seat. Maybe there'll be 2 districts and they'll get 2 seats. The problem with that is that as minority groups are gaining some equity. That's a good thing. And historic redlining, for example, is getting addressed. The minority population isn't necessarily concentrated all in certain neighborhoods anymore. That's a good thing. We want that equality. So if the minority population is spread throughout the city, then carving it up into districts doesn't help, because in every single district, there's still going to be the minority. And so it's not going to work. It's not going to have the effect that's desired. But if we keep that at-large election and use this proportional ranked choice voting method, then you achieve that proportionality that you're looking for. So this has been done in a number of cities, and we think that it is the wave of the future. So there are more and more states that are adopting a state-level Voting Rights Act. That would be because the federal government has kind of gutted the federal Voting Rights Act. So organizations like Black Voters Matter are working hard to try to fill in the gap. So as these state groups are adopting a Voting Rights Act of their own, we are encouraging them to include proportional ranked choice voting as a potential remedy if there's a violation. The challenges for that is it really depends on the court's attitude. It's part of the menu of options, but a judge has to decide that that's going to be the remedy. So it depends on that. And if there's a historic track record for carving it up into districts and having that be successful, then it's hard to get people to change. They're going to say, well, this has always worked in the past. Let's just keep doing that. So there's some challenges that we have to fight. Michigan, just in case you care, is working on a Voting Rights Act for Michigan. So we're in this process right now with the Michigan State Legislature. All right. Pat, you want to come back and do who doesn't like ranked choice voting, or do you want me to keep going? I will keep going. Who doesn't? Jacinda?
Can you go back to that?
I can.
What is my VRA?
Michigan Voting Rights Act.
Thank you.
Yep, in progress. Not passed yet, but it's been introduced and it's working its way through the state legislature.
Do you know who's sponsoring that?
Pat, do you know the sponsor of the? Not off the top of my head. Sorry. We could look it up later, though. All right, who doesn't like ranked choice voting? There is some opposition to ranked choice voting, and I take this as a sign of success that as more and more jurisdictions are adopting ranked choice voting, some opposition has come out of the woodwork. That means that we are showing success. So first of all, the people for whom the current system works really well clearly don't want to change it. Why would they? They got elected using the old system. Who wants to change the system that got them in office? So people who are enjoying power without majority support are not real happy with this idea. The talking points that they tend to give, I think, frankly, are excuses. I think that when you look at the merits of ranked choice voting, it makes a lot of sense. But if you can't argue it on the merits, you're going to come up with other excuses, because you're certainly not going to admit that you just don't like it because you can't win. So the other people who don't like ranked choice voting is campaign managers who have a playbook, tried and true, for how to win a campaign under the old system, under our current system. And so they are hesitant. They're like, oh my God, don't change the rules on me. So we get some pushback from them. Election administrators who have procedures in place for how to run an election using all the old method, they are very hesitant to have to make change because, again, it's change. People don't like change. We have responses to all of those. I would say that for election administrators, I absolutely feel for them, and it's really important that we give election administrators a long enough on-ramp to get ready to do it. I would say we shouldn't pass something in November and expect them to do it in March. I'd say we give them, a year and a half, not just a couple of months, to really get ready to do it. But to say never because I don't like change feels like not a good enough reason. The other thing we want to talk about real quick is ranked choice voting and how it plays with other reforms. It's really important to know that this is not a silver bullet. Ranked choice voting cannot solve every problem with elections. It is way better than what we're doing now. So we feel like way better is better than nothing. But it's not going to solve everything. And so people who don't want ranked choice voting can always come up with criticisms because there are weaknesses to ranked choice voting, so that's legitimate. We just don't think that they are legitimate enough to not do it. So one reform can't fix everything, and ranked choice voting works best, any election reform works best, when they're used in tandem, when we have a bunch of reforms and they're all working together to solve different problems at the same time. So, for example, vote by mail is a really good election reform. Getting to the polls is a barrier for a lot of people. When you have universal vote by mail, no excuse absentee voting, right? You don't need a doctor's note for why you want to send in your ballot ahead of time. If everybody can do that, that makes voting easier. That's good reform. There's a risk, though. What if the candidate you vote for drops out by the time election day arrives? This happens in presidential primaries a lot because it's a long election season, right? And this has happened to millions of voters in both major parties when they had a crowded field for the presidential primary. In 2016 for the Republicans, in 2020 for the Democrats, millions of voters had a ballot that didn't count for nothing because their candidate had dropped out before election day. If you had ranked choice voting, that wouldn't be a problem. So those two are a really good combination together. The national popular vote is another election reform that people talk about. It plays nicely with ranked choice voting. Every state could do ranked choice voting. The ballots would be counted across the country. They can mesh really nicely. So the other thing about ranked choice voting is it can help make progress on other reforms. If some of these reforms are a heavy lift, with ranked choice voting, having candidates in office who are more accountable to a larger swath of their constituency is going to make them responsive to these other issues that people care about. So I feel like ranked choice voting is an on-ramp to a whole menu of other reforms that would be a good idea that everybody's fighting hard to win. I am interested in what reforms you think would pair well with ranked choice voting and why, and that's something for you to think about. We're going to move into a panel discussion and would love to hear from you and some of your thoughts as we get going. So our next steps is how you can take action. And now I am turning it back to you, Pat. How can people get involved?
Well, I'll just take the first one, and then Jacinta, if you don't mind coming up. For Rank My Vote, I will send out a sign-up sheet, but rankmyvote.org. Like I said, we're working on a 2026 statewide ballot initiative. Please do subscribe and sign up. Jacinta.
Hi, thank you all for joining this, and I want to thank Akil for really getting you all here today to listen to the Rank My Vote. If you all want to get involved, please reach out to me or to Rank My Vote. I can really help plug you into other coalitions that's working on this currently and get you all involved in this. Like I said earlier, any movement is spearheaded by the youth. You all have the energy that us old people just don't have, and you all have more vibrant ideas on how to get this through. So we really do need your help on this. If you're thinking about support, both of our organizations are here to support the students with that. This whole initiative that we have, Take Back the Field, it's spearheaded by youth, by the youth voice. So if you all need resources or need to know about other collaborative efforts, please reach out to me. My phone number, my email is there, and I can help lead you all in the right direction. Thank you.
What we want to do is, I guess I should just come here. We are done talking at you, and we want to now move to a panel discussion. I am going to be joined by Pat and by Rhyane Wagner. Hi, Rhyane. Rhyane, we haven't introduced you yet. Will you come up here and introduce yourself? Or get on one of these mics, whichever you prefer. And Sabrina from FairVote is going to be our moderator. And we'll
Hello,
just leave that there
everyone.
for the moment.
Rhyane Wagner. I'm the Senior Policy Manager with Black Voters Matter Fund. So I see all the good and bad bills that come out of the state legislatures, primarily in the South and Midwest, before you even hear about them on the news. So I also work on a lot of our programming, our policy corners, which, we cover a range of topics. Next week we'll be talking about the anti-DIA bans on college campuses, some of the censorship we're seeing and what students learn on campus. We've done one on Cop City. We've done one on the bans on Black history happening in it was primarily Florida where this kind of started, but courts. We're watching litigation. I follow a lot of our state Supreme Court cases and also our federal cases. We've got another redistricting case that will be decided this year at the Supreme Court in D.C. So, yeah, I do a little bit of everything.
Cool. All right, so Pat and I are going to join you.
Oh, who's doing? I'll let Diane take the middle.
You want me to do the middle? All right, thanks.
What?
Okay, well, thanks everyone. Like Diane said, my name is Sabrina Laverty, and I am a research analyst at FairVote, and I'm really honored to serve as your moderator today for this panel discussion. As you all know, today FairVote is joined with Black Voters Matter and also Rank My Vote to explore how ranked choice voting and proportional representation can help shape a more representative and equitable electoral system. Our esteemed panelists, experts in their respective fields, bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the table. And so I know that they introduced themselves a little bit, but I want to give a little bit more background to them as well. So we have Pat. He is one of the directors at Rank My Vote. Pat joined Rank My Vote as a volunteer in 2020. And he also joined the board of directors in 2021, and he helped lead Rank My Vote's 2021 victory in Ann Arbor and 2023 signature campaigns and victories in East Lansing, Kalamazoo, and Royal Oak. Diane Silver is the program manager for state and local advocacy at FairVote. In this role, she supports active state and local ranked choice voting campaigns and rollouts by collaborating with different state and local partners, sharing resources, data expertise, and organizational capacity. Diane also helps coordinate a national network of such state organizations to facilitate peer-to-peer sharing and national growth of the movement. Diane also has been an advocate for ranked choice voting for over 20 years, talking it up to anyone who will listen. And we also have Rhyane Wagner, National Policy Manager for Black Voters Matter, as she said. Rhyane has 15 years of electoral and social justice work experience in the Deep South. She previously served as the Florida Senior State Organizing Manager for Black Voters Matter Fund. So those are our panelists. So, now that we know more about you all, let's get started. And, remember, I want this to be, a conversation. So if you want to build off of what each one of you said, feel free to do so. So my first question is actually going to go to you, Pat. So we've heard about the successes in Kalamazoo, Royal Oak, East Lansing and such. Could you share more about what made those efforts successful?
Mm-hmm. Yep, I would say definitely building coalitions is what helped make those efforts more successful, and most successful, and you could see that in our results. In Kalamazoo, where we had good coalitional support and great relationships with Black Voters Matter, Mothers of Hope, and local organizations, we won by over 70% of the vote, whereas we didn't have that support in Royal Oak and East Lansing, where we did win, but only with 51% of the vote. So definitely it's something that we're going to definitely need in our statewide initiative.
Thank you. So for any of you, this goes for any of you, what problems do you think ranked choice voting would solve if it was brought to other cities in Michigan?
I mean, I think it would make the process more equitable because our current runoff structure, winner-take-all structure, has not done right by folks who may not, they may not like the candidates that they have, the options that they have, and there's data to show that quite a few young people are not happy with what's happening in Washington and even in their local areas. Like, it's 4 million, I think, people just in that aren't registered for either party in the state of Florida. And so that's a missed opportunity to really engage people and engage them in a transformational way that's not transactional. A lot of what happens, which I firmly believe this is part of the problem, is people will show up in your neighborhood around election time and not build relationships, right? And then they leave and then you don't see them again. And ranked choice voting is one of those many tools that's at our disposal to kind of change those dynamics. And just because you've done something, winner take all has been the structure, doesn't mean that can't change and we can't move the needle. So I would say that, but also like what we saw earlier in the presentation, there are a lot of states taking their own initiative to also protect the Voting Rights Act at the state level, because we have no idea what Congress is going to do right now. And so many of the states are like, okay, well, why can't we implement our version? But that goes even further. You have states that are also making sure they are being mindful of language barriers and having, for example, voter registration forms in more than just English. And it's just, there are many ways, and I think ranked choice voting, proportional ranked choice voting is just one of the tools for us to move our democracy forward.
Cool. Well, thank you.
I can address something that you said, Diane. So in the Detroit metro area, about half of Michigan's population lives in the Detroit metro area. So it definitely dominates state politics and creates interesting issues. But to your point of Detroit, the city specifically, actually, I know people who work for the city of Detroit who feel like the state inhibits a lot of their independence, a lot of their policy progress, because there's a lot of barriers that the state puts up to the city of Detroit, creating its own initiatives. And something else I was going to bring up earlier, this kind of goes along with it, but it's a real life example. The city of Detroit, most of the city of Detroit's federal representative is Sri Thadner, who in the congressional 13th district, it's a majority black district, but the black candidate split the vote, so a non-black candidate won that district. So that's a real life example of where ranked choice voting would allow people in that district to feel represented in Congress, whereas right now they don't.
I want to turn it over to maybe now a national perspective. And so Ryan, as the senior policy manager at BVM, you have a lot of knowledge about what's going on, across the nation. And I'd love for you to share with us what you're seeing and some examples of why ranked choice voting is needed in other places as well.
Where do I begin? To bring what we're talking about in terms of the influence of cities, I'm seeing that a lot of places where there are majority black populations, right? There's intentional starvation of resources from cities, particularly cities with black leadership, right? And so that preemption strategy, if you will, I'm seeing quite a bit of elsewhere. Right, so they will ban a thing just in case you had any wild ideas about, moving your electoral process forward. So we're seeing RCV bans now in states like Texas, preemptively, right? It's also a way for state legislative bodies to attack cities they perceive to be too progressive, if you will. Preemption, right? Banning it before it even becomes an idea or a figment of folks' imagination, right? So I'm seeing mass voter purges are ongoing in certain areas, and it's in certain states it's structured to the point where those local boards of elections don't have to necessarily notify you. So the onus is on the voter to make sure they are current with their information. I'm always a firm believer in building those relationships with your supervisors of elections, but we're seeing more and more driver's license ID changes and restrictions I mean, the list could go on because I don't want to be a Debbie Downer with this either. But I lay the weight of this at one, the election of the first black president in '08, but also Shelby v. Holder was devastating to the Voting Rights Act in 2014. I think we're on year 10 now. And you had a Supreme Court, particularly a Chief Justice, who, had it out for the Voting Rights Act. And so, fast forward to 2024, we're seeing a lot of, because those pre-clearances, that accountability, Section 2 and Section 5 have been gutted, you're seeing these states do whatever they want, right? You name it, think of your worst, right? You've got election police forces in some states. You've got the reintroduction of state militias. Who knows what they're going to be used for? You have attacks on groups' ability to feed people in line as they wait to go vote. The closure of quite a few early voting locations, you name it. These are tactics that otherwise wouldn't have gone through with a fully functioning, strengthened Voting Rights Act. So, and we're fighting a lot of these battles in court, which I'm grateful for our courts, but before Shelby, there were other accountability measures in place, right? So the court was typically your last line of defense. They have become the front lines. And we've had some wins, so don't get me wrong. In Louisiana, we had a big win with our redistricting cases. We're, fighting the governor of Florida right now as we speak to protect Congressional District 5 that covers Jacksonville. Allen v. Milligan. But even with Allen v. Milligan, this passed earlier in the year in Montgomery County. They were sent the wrong voter information. And they got these brand new districts, right? But there's still this need to not only talk about and radically reimagine elections in general and talk about RCV, but also protect what we've got left and push for the reintroduction of the Freedom to Vote Act and John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So it's kind of layered. So it's not just one thing, not one tactic. Obviously, that puts more work on our coalition groups, but we're happy to do it to make sure people have access to the ballot. We're building transformational relationships. This is not a one-time thing. And I'll speak for Black Voters Matter. We do this year-round, 365, because what's most important to us is the trust of our communities. So I hope I didn't. That's just a little bit of what I'm saying, but yeah, there's no protections in place that like we had before, where a Texas can't just go, sweet, we can do whatever we want now, not have to ask the Department of Justice for permission. So, and you're seeing that backlash, sustained backlash, over the course of 10 years. And if you get an opportunity, the Brennan Center had a really, really good analysis of how that has impacted turnout since 2008.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm so glad you brought up all of those examples. And so stemming from that, and this is, for any of you, what do you think about the urgency of ranked choice voting? How urgent is it that we pass this?
Oh, I mean, very urgent. For the examples brought up, for all the examples brought up, it's really just a question of how quickly can it be passed. I mean, working nationally, but now there's national attention on it, and even as opposed to when I joined Rank My Vote 4 years ago, people are well aware of it. It's a question of how quickly can it get on the ballot, how quickly can coalitions be built that bring it about, and that's certainly a real challenge because it takes a lot of resources to move so many voters, to make them aware of it, to collect signatures, place it on ballots, and make them aware of this change.
Also, anytime you see groups starting to ban a thing, that you're doing your job. Like, they're worried about something happening, so.
How much would something like that cost each state to be able to do?
To implement ranked choice voting, it really depends. It varies you talking to here? Hello. It varies county to county because it depends on what kind of voting equipment they're using at the moment. One thing that I've seen happen is opponents will claim that switching to ranked choice voting is going to be inordinately expensive because the voting equipment is going to need to be updated. But the thing is, if your voting equipment is less than 10 years old, it's probably already capable of doing ranked choice voting. You might need to purchase an additional software module, but the hardware is capable of reading ranked ballots. There are some counties that are using voting machines that are so old that they're not capable of doing it. And what I would say is, if your voting machine is that old, you probably need to be updating it anyway to run any election, because it is not up to snuff for election security and election integrity and all the other issues around elections that we're seeing these days. So opponents like to blame the cost of upgrade on ranked choice voting, on this interest in switching to ranked choice voting. But the truth is, those areas need to upgrade anyway, and then they will be ranked choice capable, and then they could make the switch. Now, that's not to say that there's no cost. Especially the first year that it's used, the first time it's used, there needs to be robust voter education, probably more voter education than is normally done. Every time there's an election, there needs to be voter education. So that's the other piece of it, is that people like to say, oh, well, the voter education is so expensive. And I'm thinking, but you have to do voter education anyway. Every time there's an election, there's a voter guide that gets created by the elections board, and it has instructions for how to cast your ballot and where to cast your ballot and what the dates are and what the ballots will look like. There are sample ballots that you can download. It has information on all the candidates that the candidates' campaigns, submit, all these things. So you're doing all of that anyway. It's the marginal cost of adding an extra 2 pages to the voter education guide to give instructions about how ranked choice voting is going to work. That would be the additional cost. So there is some cost. I'm not saying there's not, but it's not this inordinate cost that opponents like to make out that it would be. But I can't give you an exact number because it just varies depending on jurisdiction.
Asking is a year and a half ago, Michigan passed reproductive freedom law. If it was not for the students, we would not have had it, because we had students on campuses across Michigan until 3 o'clock in the morning to make sure that their vote was heard. But to run that campaign, to get the signatures and everything, it was expensive. And it had to be changed in our state constitution. And so I am loving this, but it wouldn't be that costly, would it? I'm hoping it wouldn't be that costly.
Well, being on Rank by Vote's working on a state constitutional amendment, so it would be likewise, since it would be a state constitutional amendment. We estimate that across groups, total spending on a ranked choice voting campaign in Michigan alone for 2026 would be $30 million.
Great. So now that we've heard, why we need ranked choice voting, I'd like to talk about it more in practice. And so, Diane, could you tell us a little bit more about what the research says about ranked choice voting and how it's contributed to representation for women and people of color?
Sure. Yeah. I think I mentioned earlier that, especially proportional ranked choice voting, but even single winner, we definitely see increases in women and people of color running for office and winning office. And there's a couple of reasons for that. So first, I'll give you just a little bit of, you asked for the research, so just a little bit of numbers. After 2020, FairVote and a partner organization did some number crunching on elections between 2010 and 2020 and found, let's do women first, kind of across the board and at all levels, women won approximately 25% of elected offices, which is a big improvement over past years and past decades. When they pulled out just the jurisdictions that used ranked choice voting, there were 19 that were using it in that time period. the rate of women winning was about 48%, 48, 49%. That is nearly double the rate of representation of women winning in the ranked choice jurisdictions versus across the board. And I would argue that that 25% is a little bit elevated because of those 19 jurisdictions that are mixed in with there. If we had crunched the numbers for just cities that don't use ranked choice voting, I think it would have been lower, but I can't say that definitively because that wasn't part of the calculation. So there's that. For people of color, we have seen over and over again that when jurisdictions adopt ranked choice voting, people of color start winning offices. In New York City, the first time they used it, they elected the most diverse city council ever. They elected their second black mayor, only the second time in the history of New York City, they elected a black mayor, so that's significant. In Minneapolis and St. Paul, they've been using it for a number of years. Prior to ranked choice voting, this is one of my favorite examples. The city council in St. Paul was all men. I believe maybe there was one woman. And maybe there was one person of color. This past year, after several cycles of ranked choice voting, the St. Paul City Council is 100% women. All women on that city council, and 90% of them are women of color. So that's a huge impact. And we see similar gains in Minneapolis, where the Minneapolis City Council is far more diverse than it was prior to using ranked choice voting. In the Bay Area, in Las Cruces and Santa Fe, New Mexico, everywhere that ranked choice voting is used, we see these increases. And the reason is that it's kind of what I talked about in the presentation. Our current method of voting puts up barriers to people running and to people winning. So first of all, fewer of those candidates run because they get accused of being the spoiler, right? So you take that barrier out, more people are willing to run. And then because there's no spoiler, one thing that the data has shown is, for example, when there are several black candidates running in a district that's a majority black district, instead of competition, what happens is we see an increase in engagement from voters. That voter turnout tends to increase. It's hard to claim causality on that because voter turnout has a lot of confounding factors. So I like to be careful about saying ranked choice voting does this, but there's a correlation that we see pretty consistently in increase in voter turnout. But also we've seen that black voters rank more candidates on their ballots than white voters. They're engaging with that opportunity to rank. So what we see is that when they're given the opportunity to have more preference, to express more preference, they do. And I think that's part of what drives that turnout. When there are more people on the ballot, there's a greater chance that somebody in that field is going to resonate with you, right? You're going to be like, I really like that person. I'm going to get out there and vote for them. I'm going to make sure I get out and vote because I want to see them win. And then you get to rank. And so you say, well, if they can't win, then my second choice would be whoever. And if they can't win, then my third choice would be whoever. And so all of those factors taken together is why we see greater engagement by these underrepresented communities and therefore greater representation for them. So I think the impact has been tremendous.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm really appreciating this conversation. This has all been really great. I'd like to delve in now to proportional ranked choice voting and also fair maps. And so we know, fair maps and redistricting play a really pivotal role in shaping political landscapes. And so how do you believe that fair maps and proportional representation can address the challenges of gerrymandering and ensure equitable representation for all communities in Michigan?
Can I actually show one more slide?
Sure.
I don't want to scoot you out of there, but just in case you asked this question, I did prepare one more slide, which is this one. So let me have this so everybody can hear me and I don't have to shout. So in this slide, on the left, we have our single winner districts, and it shows you the party that wins in those districts, Democrat, Republican, or a swing. Like it's likely Republican. The red is likely Republican, The blue is likely Democrat. The gray is a swing district, and the purple is a multi-winner district. So you can see on the left where there's this gap. I have a pointer. This is really exciting. Right here where you see this gap in the mitten, these are gray districts where these are actually swing districts. So right here there are swing districts. Right here there are swing. There's a little bit in here. All this red are safe seats for Republicans. And this blue, you can guess where that is, these are safe seats for Democrats. So what this means is the election is over in the primary for the most part because we already know who's going to win in the general. These districts are safe for one party or another. If we were to use multi-winner ranked choice voting and the proportional method that we're proposing, we would not have all of these single winner districts. We would have just a few big districts with multiple representatives in each district, and all of them would be competitive. And all of them would have some representation from Republicans and some representation from Democrats. And so that would be a far more balanced delegation for the state of Michigan. And if we have these bigger districts, it's just a lot harder to gerrymander them because there's not very many lines to be drawn. You can gerrymander with all kinds of crazy shapes when you have lots of lines to draw. But when you're doing these bigger geographic areas, it's just hard to do. So that's how it helps address gerrymandering, is it kind of eliminates the opportunity. So thanks for that.
Thanks. So, considering the historical context of, redistricting in Michigan, what lessons do you all think that we can learn from past experiences to really, guide us in creating more inclusive and representative electoral districts?
It's never too early to start talking census, to be honest with you. And I said this earlier at Wayne State. I'm like, we need to really get on the ball with the census because there was a lot of misconceptions, at least when I helped support the work around what the census does and what it doesn't do in terms of how our maps look, our voting power, our resources even that get to our communities. Some of our states, the governors did not ask for funding support at all. And so we as a coalition had to get the work done still, right? Was there an undercount still? There was. But it would have been far worse had we not done anything at all and come together in community and in our coalition spaces to get it done. North Carolina, they had maps decided on that were equitable and fair, and then they had a shift in the political spectrum, if you will, of the state Supreme Court. That Supreme Court the following year decided, we don't like any of the maps you drew, put them back where they were, which was why there was a lawsuit in the first place. So I say that to say we ended up we might have to fight for, fair maps again in North Carolina. We don't know yet, but just what it did do is show the importance of the courts as well in this fight, right? And how important it is, regardless of what voting method we ultimately use, we have to fight for our communities and not have them split up. Because the maps that came out of North Carolina, they looked awful, okay? Once the court was like, we don't like what you had before, we know best. We like and it was basically you split up essentially the black parts of the state, many of which were HBCUs were, and I'm trying to be brief, but again, it goes to show you not only do we have to radically reimagine how we see our democracy and introduce tools like proportional representation, but we still have to have those fights around making sure our communities don't get broken up. And so that we still get the resources that we need into our neighborhoods.
Thanks. So I only have two other questions left, so we're almost done. And so something that I'm sure a lot of you have heard a lot about is the uncommitted voters. And so I want to shift gears to the presidential election cycle that's going to be, coming up, and how ranked choice voting can benefit the uncommitted voters this November.
Oh, sure.
You want to take it?
I can take a stab at it. Well, certainly, I mean, with ranked choice voting right now, there's just pressure to vote for. So there's examples. I mean, ranked choice voting empowers voters so that in the primary and the general, it's applicable. So in the general election, if you don't like one of the top two candidates, you can vote down ballot without feeling like you're wasting your vote, and still you rank all the candidates so you're not wasting your vote. Likewise, in primaries, I mean, we talked about having more voter choice in primaries, not splitting up the vote so that a non-representative candidate wins, and that brings out more candidates to run in primaries. With ranked choice voting, we talked about that, brings out more candidates. Candidates aren't worried about stealing some other vote. And when we see that with, right now we're seeing that with no labels, where a lot of candidates are being asked to run third party, but they all are backing out, saying, well, I don't want to be a spoiler. So it just encourages candidates to run and allow voters to vote down ballot, not like they have to choose between the top two.
I would say one other, spot on, yeah. I think one other dynamic that's interesting is that with ranked choice voting, the cast vote record that we get after the election, ballots are all anonymous. We have secret ballots, so we don't know whose ballot it is, but we have all that data of all of the rankings on every single ballot. And so we can see how the vote transfers happened, how in these instant runoffs, when one candidate gets dropped out, who of the remaining candidates did those votes go to? Like when whoever the ultimate winner is, where did they get their support? They got X amount, they had, 42% of first choice votes, and that was from their base. So we know their base supports them, but who are the voters who put them over the top and gave them the win by getting them over 50%? With ranked choice voting, we have that data, and so it makes the candidate more accountable to those voters. It's a political statement of don't take us for granted. And with ranked choice voting, those underrepresented groups have more voice, and their voice gets heard, and it makes a difference.
I have it's a similar, I see where you're going. I think I wanted to bring up the issue of closed versus open primaries too, because that's part of the problem, right? If you're in a state that has a closed primary, you're not allowing a certain segment of your voter base to participate in the primary process, and that's messed up, right? When you have a closed primary. And then on top of that, either party, even if you had more options in your respective party, the one that's most popular might have the state party behind them telling those other candidates to drop out, which in that case, the voters suffer for that. So you're forcing them with one option, right? And, I could go on and on about this country and old white guys getting elected to office, right? And the frustration in that as a Black woman and being part of a voter base that has been the most consistent for a particular party. And so there is that taking for granted in that protest vote, I guess, if you will. But I like that this conversation is sparking folks to really pay attention to the candidates down ballot, right? Because no matter what's happening in D.C., what's happening in your state capitals and in your cities and county governments will impact you sooner and quicker. And not that what's happening in D.C. is not important, but some of these damaging bills I'm seeing are doing so much harm to our communities at the state and local level. So I believe all voting is local, right? We kind of see it as an inverted pyramid. DC's last. But we need to have these larger conversations about opening up our primaries, right? And RCV is just one of those ways. And and unfortunately, parties haven't done a good job of building out the pipeline of the next generation, or they'll tell you to wait your turn, which is something that I've personally dealt with, even in my work previously, being told to wait my turn. And young people are sick of that. Like, the time is now. Maxwell Frost is 25 years old, right? He had people all over the place telling him that he wasn't going to beat his opponent. So at some point, we have to really think about who we want to be and in terms of moving this country forward. Like, I know that there are quite a few young people sick of having the lesser of two evils as your only option. And knowing that the powers that be haven't done a good job of communicating to you all or building the pipeline or encouraging you to run, for instance. There are Black candidates that I've seen in the South that have their party that they're a part of specifically ran a white candidate against them because that they were scared of the Black candidate not being successful. Well, if you're not even giving us an opportunity, why bother, right? And ranked choice voting is one of those ways that levels the playing field and opens it up. And so there's not this fear of any particular party holding you back or being afraid to take a chance on you. Because at the end of the day, the voters are taking a chance on you.
Well, all of that was so great. Thank you all so much. One last question is, Pat, Ryan, so what's next? What are y'all working towards at Black Voters Matter, Rank My Vote? How can people get involved?
I'm still in legislative session, so I am. Louisiana is actually the latest to start theirs, and they had 2 special sessions. I might have a special session ahead of me in Florida. The governor has decided to target the Haitian community in Florida. He wants to create the same immigration bill that passed in Texas. He wants a Florida version of it, so I might have a few special sessions to worry about. But I'm still doing my programming for our policy corners. I try to do 4 a year. We'll see, since it's an election year, presidential election year, and obviously keeping track of some of the voting rights Supreme Court cases that are still in progress. There's some litigation BVM was a part of in terms of protecting Congressional District 5, which covers Jacksonville. Louisiana, we had a great win, Power Coalition. Like, I'm sure you've read about it and heard about it, but it's just trying to get through this election cycle, y'all. But primarily legislative session, finishing that up, doing more policy corners, deepening our relationships with our national partners around ranked choice voting, so.
2026 ballot initiative for us. Pretty soon we'll be running a launch, having a launch party, launching our campaign, collecting signatures. I say pretty soon. Probably not collecting signatures until 2025, but it seems very soon to organizers. Yeah.
I mean,
please be involved.
We have 6 years until the next census. It's going by fast.
Yeah. Well, thank you all so much, and thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it. I really appreciate all the conversation, and I'm going to open it up to questions in just a second. I just want to put this slide up, and before you leave today, if you could, please scan this QR code. We love our QR codes here, clearly. Give us some feedback. Tell us, what you liked, anything that you want to be involved in. If you want to hear more from us, from Black Voters Matter, from Rank My Vote, we can contact you for more information if you want to get involved. And so, yeah, with that, I'd also like to remind you, you have a little brochure that's at your table, plus a lot of cool swag things. There's also some swag over there. Make sure you get it. It's free. Inside the brochure, there is a another QR code where you can just sign in, tell us that you were here at this event. We, like to try to track those things. But yeah, I will now stop talking and turn it over to questions if anyone has any questions. Yes. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but thank you all so much. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to all of you that came. We really, really appreciate it. We don't have time for another question, but
You can ask us right after.
you can ask us, yes, after.
Please eat, take
yes,
food.
Please eat, take food. We'll still be here, so you can totally ask your question to us later. Because we are interested in hearing it. But yeah, thank you all again so much.
Thanks, Sabrina.
And thank you to you all for hosting us.
Yes, thank you.